Hello, this is Wes Bridle, and this is another Kingdom Calling Economic Update video. These videos are short snapshots of what's been happening, in this case, over the last week in our economy. They all only really have context if you view the Coming Storm video, where we spent an hour and a half talking about what's going to be happening in our economy. If you haven't seen that, please, you can watch that for free. There's a link next to this video, and you can watch that for free, and that would be really important for you and your family because the situation facing us is extremely difficult. This information we're going to talk about in these two videos that we're doing this week are just a snapshot of what's been happening in the last week. Because I'm doing this a little more regularly than I have been, I don't have as many news items, so I'm just kind of splitting them into two. I'm going to talk about these being double dip recession type items, and we're going to jump into it. M3 is plunging. This is a pretty broad measure of money supply. M3 is plunging at a rate that we haven't seen since 1929, right before the Great Depression. So this is a pretty scary thing. Our Federal Reserve hasn't been keeping track of this number anymore, but there are European banks that watch the health of the United States, and they do keep track of it, and it's dropping at an annual rate of 9.6%. What's happening is the Fed is printing tremendous amount of money, but it's all being stored up at the banks. The banks are really hurting, they're in trouble, and so they know they've got a lot of bad loans on their books, so they can either make new loans out that are risky, or they can take that money from the government and turn around and lend it back to the government and make a guaranteed profit. And so this is how the big banks didn't lose money any day last quarter. It's a guaranteed thing that they can do. It also helps the U.S. government because they don't have to look as hard to find people to lend them money because they're just getting their own money back to them, and it's not considered monetization, even though it really is. All that to say, even though they're printing tons of money, it's not really hitting the street yet, and so we're seeing a contraction of money supply, which is very bad. We saw that was one of the reasons causing the Great Depression, and now it's hurting our economy very badly. Moving on to Europe, austerity in Europe means spending cuts. So what you'll see with a lot of the news that's out right now is even though there will be a good thing, like, hey, governments are realizing they need to spend less money, we've gotten ourselves into such a crazy bubble situation that it has to pop one way or another. The good news leads to bad news. In this case, because the governments are realizing they need to spend less money, which is good. I wish our government would realize that. But that means they're spending less money. So England, for instance, has warned IBM and Bristol Myers Squibb that they're not going to be spending as much money on their products and services as they have in the past. So when they cut back, it's bad for the economy. It's another reason that we're about to head into a renewed recession. And again, European austerity. So Germans, for whatever reason, for some good reasons, are considered the most austere, the most prudent with their finances of Europe. They only have a 5% deficit in the last year, whereas most of them are double that. Still, I don't know how 5% is considered good, but it's better than most, better than the United States, certainly. But did you know that Eric Sprott put this out, and this kind of blew my mind. German banks are some of the most levered in the world. The four largest German banks have leverage of 60 to 1, 75 to 1, 77 to 1, and 124 to 1. So that one with the most leverage, if they lose 0.8 of 1% of their assets, which surely they have since March, then they're upside down. And so the German banks are in terrible shape. As Eric Sprott mentioned, this is probably why the German government stepped in and said no short selling, because they knew that they were in a dangerous position. It's also probably why Germany's willing to bail out Southern Europe, because the German banks are going to get hurt as those assets fall in Southern Europe, because they've got a lot of loans there, as does France. We're all interconnected. And so as one goes down, we're all going to go down, and that's what's happening. Payroll, we saw a couple big numbers came out on Friday. Payrolls rose by 431,000. That was maybe a couple 100,000 less than they expected. But the really bad news is almost all those were government jobs, census jobs. There were only 41,000 private jobs. And if you've seen the report from the New York Post, the census, they're hiring, firing, and rehiring just to pick up the numbers, so it looks like they've hired a lot of people. doesn't even really matter what the census hires. Obviously, it's great for you if you're getting a job for a little while and you haven't had one, but as far as the economy goes, that's a temporary job and doesn't really matter. Back to Europe, Italy's biggest bank, UniCredit, they're going to have problems again. They are heavily invested in Eastern Europe, and the other big news on Friday was that Hungary said they're going to go down the same road as Greece. They had a new government come in. They said the old government was cooking the books, and they said there's a good chance that they were going to go insolvent, and now, of course, they're under attack and they're in trouble. So that's not only trouble for them, but it's trouble to all the banks that lent to them. In this case, Italy's biggest bank, which is big trouble for Italy, who already has issues. Detroit, have you seen this? Detroit is going to bulldoze thousands of homes. Detroit has like dropped in half of size. So they have ghost towns where there's just thousands and thousands of empty buildings, empty houses on streets where there's maybe one person living on the whole street. The mayor's plan is to go in and just bulldoze thousands of these buildings so that they don't have to continue keeping up the city services for those areas. This is where we've come to. Detroit is really, for the last many decades, has been the epitome of social services, of socialism in this country. And look what's happened in that city. Because government, they spent billions of dollars making Detroit a socialist paradise, and it's turned into a decrepit city that no one wants to live in and no one wants to do business in. And unfortunately, that's the way our entire country has been going. Let's see, new bank failures. Every week the FDIC puts up on Friday the number of new banks failed. And 2 weeks ago the number was 5, and on this past Friday it was 3. So 8 new bank failures since the last time I think I reported. It's up to 81 on the year, and that's double the pace of 2009, which was the highest since 1992. So massive amount of bank failures going on out there. The FDIC's list of problem banks is up to 775. All the banks have problems because they're not having to mark to market what their assets are really worth. So if you're on the problem bank list, it's a serious issue. The interesting report I read, which is terrible, but it's interesting. Ally Bank, which is the old GMAC, is apparently, according to this report, offering loans at terms that they will lose money on. They make money for a little while, they're leases, but the way these leases are structured, it's a known fact that in 3 or 4 years they're going to lose money. And the thinking is they're doing this so GM can look really profitable, so GM can then have an IPO, be sold so the government gets some of their money back. But the problem is they'll make that look good, but then the other government pocket of Ally Bank, the old GMAC, is going to be losing money. That's on us. And so they'll spin this off to stockholders, and then stockholders will get a company that won't be able to do this anymore, and then they'll have problems again. So just an ugly situation all the way around when government's trying to run business. Europe is China's biggest trading partner. I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but as the euro is falling, and China currently or in the past has sent more exports to China than anywhere, as the euro falls, it makes people unable to afford the Chinese goods. Chinese goods aren't as cheap as they used to be, so that ends up being a big problem for China. China's been the engine of the world economy, so that's a huge problem. Warren Buffett was recently called in to Congress. They made him testify. He didn't want to. They asked him why he failed to recognize the bubble. He said, "I blew it." So I just thought that was worth noting because I've had some discussions about Warren Buffett. He's obviously been coming around recently, but he didn't see some of these things happening as they were happening. And the last item here, there were fewer homes sold year-to-date in 2010 than there were in 2009. 2009 was a horrible year. This is even with the huge giveaway the government was doing in the first quarter of this year, and still we're behind the 2009 number. Pretty ugly situation. We're really about to see the economy really turn bad here in the coming months. And I hope you're prepared. Again, if you haven't seen the Coming Storm video, really, you can watch that for free. You really need to. Just help you to prepare for what's coming. Thanks, and God bless you.